When I reviewed the Toyota RAV4 Prime last year, I came away shocked. It offered amazing flexibility, offering in a real world over 50 miles of electric range, and then once that was spent, well, it became a regular hybrid, so no range anxiety. All for a relatively affordable price at 45 grand. And now it's Hyundai coming for a piece of the pie with the introduction of this, the 2022 Santa Fe Plug-In Hybrid. But is it any good? Can it dethrone the Toyota RAV4 Prime? Well, let's go find out. First things first, an explainer. The Santa Fe is a larger two-row SUV from Hyundai that stacks above the Tucson, the vehicle that does most directly compete against the Toyota RAV4 in terms of size. For perspective, this thing's about 8 inches longer, which as you'll see absolutely plays out in the way this thing drives and the way this thing feels from behind the wheel. The reason why I'm comparing this against the RAV4 Prime is the fact that, for now at least, plug-in hybrid SUVs are relatively few and far between, and that's definitely the vehicle that most people have on their minds when they think of a plug-in hybrid. So, stiff competition for Hyundai. But here's where the tech comes in. Under the hood is a 1.6-liter turbo 4-cylinder, which is paired to an electrified powertrain, similar to what you'd find in, well, the regular Santa Fe hybrid, also a very nice vehicle. However, like the RAV4 Prime, Hyundai stuffs in a much larger battery pack. It's now a 12.4 kilowatt hour pack, and when paired to the same 69 kilowatt electric motor, means this thing has a combined 261 horsepower, which is pretty potent in a vehicle of this size. That does trail the RAV4 Prime, which is over 300, but still, this thing does 0 to 60 in the mid 6-second range. It's not exactly a slouch. But the 0 to 60 sprint isn't what you care about. Because this is a plug-in hybrid, this thing can do up to 30 miles of pure electric driving. But once those 30 miles are up, don't worry, this thing just becomes a regular 33 mile to the gallon hybrid. If you want to take that big cross-country road trip, go for it. That's the huge perk of this. The plug-in hybrid kind of gives you that entry level to the world of electrified vehicles, but without any of the range anxiety or any of the drawbacks if you live in an area of the country where you might not have the electric infrastructure yet like we do in LA. Hey you, watching this video? Yeah, you. If you haven't already, like and subscribe, it helps me out. Do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. If all of this sounds a bit theoretical to you, let me make it real. I'm averaging over 73 miles to the gallon even after doing all this canyon driving for filming this video and doing the photography for this car. That's astounding. Before I came up here, I was averaging close to 90 mpg, which is amazing. The EPA officially rates this thing at 76 mpge, though as you can see, your numbers will vary based on how you drive this thing, how regularly you can charge it, things like that. If you do a lot of around town driving and keep this thing charged up, well, the gas engine may just rarely, if ever, turn on. But like right now, climbing up this steep grade, if I want the extra power, the engine does kick on, and I'm happy to report it's a really good engine. The implementation of the electrified powertrain and this gas engine is so smooth that in day-to-day driving, when it kind of toggles between the two, it's almost imperceptible. The engine itself is really smooth, very little in the way of vibrations or even much noise. It's great. And of course, when you are driving in pure EV, it's just silence. I'm also happy to report that Hyundai's claims of a 30-mile pure EV range seems dead on the money in my testing. But when it comes to electrified powertrains, a plug-in hybrid might be your first entryway to an electrified vehicle. So you might be wondering, well, how do you charge it? This thing does come with a charger. It's in the trunk. It comes in a nice little Velcro bag that sticks in there so it doesn't slide around or anything. And basically, you can just plug it into any old wall outlet if you want. I mean, I had this thing charging in my garage overnight, and that's no problem at all. Of course, you can also plug this thing into faster chargers like level 2 chargers that you find around town. I have one at my gym and it works just fine. Plug into this thing, which is very handy. But even just using a regular old wall outlet is totally fine here. Because the battery pack is just 12.3 kilowatt hours, it's a relatively small pack, and with 30 miles of range, that means you can charge it from basically fully flat to fully charged in about 12 hours off a regular wall outlet. And so that's pretty much exactly what I've been doing. I've been charging this thing up when I come home at night, and then when I wake up the next morning and go to drive, it's ready to go. It's also worth noting that at this point I have driven the gasoline-powered Santa Fe, a regular hybrid model, and this plug-in, and this one is definitely the best implementation. No knocking against those other two models, they are great, but man, there is absolutely an added luxury of a plug-in hybrid because when it's cruising in EV mode, it's so quiet in here. That's a luxury in and of itself, as is basically not having to go to the gas station that frequently. For perspective, as I'm filming this right now, I've driven 135 miles so far, and because most of my driving in LA is around town, it's been driving purely like an EV. And so the gas gauge has just barely gone under full after 135 miles of driving. Not having to go to the gas station, especially when gas is $6 a gallon in LA right now, is absolutely an added luxury in and of itself. With plug-in hybrids, people will inevitably ask, well, don't you want more range? Only 30 miles? Well, yes, of course I want more range. Why wouldn't you want more? Don't you always want more? But I think 30 miles is a nice middle ground because I'm thinking about the worst commutes I've done in LA, and trust me, they were awful. Hours upon hours of tedium and gridlock. And the longest one was 25 miles each way. So in theory, I could have driven to work in pure EV, had a few miles of range left, and my office did have a few chargers in the parking garage where I parked, and so I could have charged this thing up and probably driven home on pure EV too. But even if I wasn't able to charge at work, knocking 30 miles of range off this thing and only having about 20 miles of pure hybrid driving, I only would have used about half a gallon of fuel, making this a super economical solution for getting around LA or really any somewhat metropolitan or urban area. So I love the powertrain of the Santa Fe plug-in hybrid, but what about the rest of the experience? Well, this model only has two trim levels, SCL Convenience, which is typically the mid-level trim for Hyundai vehicles, and the top-level Limited, which this one is. Prices start at 40 grand. This Limited is 46 grand as tested, and from where I'm sitting, it's a fantastic value. For 46 grand, we have a leather interior. These front seats are powered, heated, and ventilated. This leather steering wheel, also heated. And we have a great variety of tech, as is the way with modern Hyundai vehicles. Behind the camera is a 10-inch infotainment display, which is quite nice in its implementation, and has standard wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. There's also wireless phone charging down here, which I'm taking advantage of. And don't forget Harman Kardon premium audio and this absolutely massive panoramic sunroof, which is very, very cool. This thing is super nicely equipped for what you pay. And remember how I mentioned the fact that this thing is slightly larger than most of the competition, being 8 inches longer than the RAV4? I'm 6'1" and I very comfortably fit in all 4 seats, no problem. And the trunk space in this thing is absolutely cavernous. All the extra room you get with this thing compared to the RAV4 is well spent in this interior. There's just so much space. And that 46 grand price point doesn't factor in state and federal tax rebates, which you can get for this vehicle, depending on where you live, up to $6,500, which isn't knocked directly off the price as such, but at the end of the year, come tax time, that could be a huge perk. I also love the ride quality on this thing. Despite rolling on standard 19-inch wheels, which look pretty cool, this thing is so comfortable. Hyundai's tuned it for comfort and not a sporty ride, which I can absolutely appreciate because look at this thing. You don't want to thrash it around in a canyon like what I'm doing, but on the everyday commute and bumping around town, this thing is serene. What's interesting about this whole experience is that I've come away from the Santa Fe actually liking it more than the RAV4 Prime. Sure, the Toyota has more pure EV range, but this has a much nicer interior and a more comfortable ride in my opinion. This is definitely the more luxury-oriented vehicle. And it's a similar story if you compare this thing against like the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid or the Ford Escape plug-in hybrid. This just comes away feeling like a much more luxurious experience, which is what Hyundai has really nailed down in recent years as sort of a value luxury play in the market. Apples to apples, when optioned up, this is basically the same price as a RAV4 Prime, making for a really competitive option here. But this love fest comes with a huge asterisk. The asterisk here is the availability. For now, for 2022, Hyundai's only be selling this thing in 11 states, which was probably a very targeted decision on their part. These are typically more green states that you think of in the US. Let me read them off for you. You can buy this thing in California, Colorado, Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, Rhode Island, and Vermont. If you didn't hear your state on that list, well, too bad. I guess you'll have to cross state lines to get this thing if you want it. That's certainly a bummer, but if you do live in one of those 11 states, well, good news. This is a great alternative to the very popular RAV4 Prime. This thing is a very easy recommendation from me to you. It's comfortable, it's quiet, it's refined, it's luxurious, it's ultra efficient, and ultimately not that expensive for what you're getting. Yes, 46 grand at face value sounds like a lot of cash, but this is a lot of car. And I think that's a great place to wrap things up. The Hyundai Santa Fe Plug-In Hybrid was a very happy surprise to drive because it's such a good vehicle. I'm really enamored by this thing, and I think you will be too. Alright guys, that's all I got for this one. My name is Jake. You've been watching Drive, Brake, Fix, Repeat. Please subscribe if you haven't already and like this video. It definitely helps me out, and I'll see you guys next time where I go do more fun things with cars. Bye.